Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another session at TMF Week 2024, our fifth installation of TMF Week. And we have Kathy just in time, perfect. I want to welcome you to the next session of the day, which is all about risk-based TMF management. But before I jump into what that means, just a couple quick housekeeping. So all of these sessions will be recorded and in fact available at the end of the conference, not at the end of the day. So Friday afternoon is when you'll be able to log back in and review any of the sessions that you may have missed. Quick overview on the timeline today. There is no presentation, so we're looking at about 45 minutes to an hour of conversation. Please ask questions throughout the session, as our panelists will be fielding them throughout versus at the end. Okay. Just to introduce today's session, we have a couple changes. So the risks of not taking a risk-based approach to TMF management is the title of the panel, led by Paul Fenton, CEO of Montrium. We also have Nick Hargaden from Moderna, Kathy Clark as an independent, Anne Noel Charles from GSK, and recently added Donatella Ballerini from Montrium. With that, I am going to hand it over to you, Paul, to kick off the panel. And I believe we're starting with some polls, correct?
That's right. Thank you, Oliver, and thank you to all of the panelists for being part of today's discussion. And thank you also to the audience for being here in great numbers. It's really encouraging to see the number of people connecting to this session. I think that people are very focused right now on risk-based approach. Obviously, it's a very important topic when it comes to TMF. And obviously, there's definitely a clear expectation as well from the regulators that pharma companies and CROs and biotechs, of course, take a risk-based approach when it comes to TMF management, and in fact, pretty much everything nowadays in clinical trial management. So we are going to have some polls, but I thought we would just very quickly do a round table just to introduce the panelists. And I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So we'll start maybe with Anne Noel.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Anne Noel. I'm working at GSK as a Director of Clinical Documentation Operations. I'm in that role since 3 years now. And so managing a team of clinical documentation manager. And I'm also the TMF process owner at GSK.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne Noel. Kathy, would you like to go next?
Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Clark, and I have worked for a number of different software companies over the years in developing TMFs as a product manager, eTMF as a product manager, and in professional services, and recently went into business for myself. So my company's now called Kathy Clark Expert Services for Life Sciences. And it's nice to see all of you today.
Congratulations. Nice to see you too, Kathy. Thanks for joining. Nick, would you like to go next?
Sure. So yeah, I work at Moderna. I have two hats there, a little similar to Anne Noel. I'm the business system owner for our CTMS and eTMF, and I also manage all of our TMF operations across the portfolio. And then I guess the other thing most recently is I joined the TMF Reference Model Steering Committee in CDISC.
Great. Thanks, Nick. And then last but not least, Donatella. You're on mute, Donatella. There we go.
Now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, super. Thank you, Paul. So yes, I'm a little bit the intruder for today's panel. I hope you don't mind if I get into this panel because, risk. I like risk. And definitely, I think it will be a very interesting discussion. I'm head of TMF services in Montrium. My background is in clinical development. I spent 16 years in documentation management, GCP, and quality. I'm very happy to be here with such icons of TMF today for this panel.
Great, thanks, Donatella. All right, well, let's get started. So today we're going to be discussing risk-based approach and the risk of not taking a risk-based approach. But to really get us started, we wanted to understand a little bit more our audience. And so we have 3 poll questions that we're going to ask you. And so we're going to bring up the first poll, and I'll read it out. So where is your organization at in implementing a risk-based approach to trial master file? So answer A is we've not implemented it. Answer B is we're planning to implement it. Answer C is we're in the process of implementing. Answer D is we've partially implemented. And answer E is we've fully implemented a risk-based approach to trial master file. So I'll give you guys a few more seconds. So if you can all vote, that would be fantastic. And what's encouraging is there are some organizations or individuals that work for organizations on the call that have implemented a risk-based approach. So that's very interesting. I'm sure they're going to have some interesting contributions in the chat as well as we discuss this. But it looks like there's a majority of people that haven't implemented it yet, and a number of organizations who are in the process. I'm not that surprised by that response, because I think it is something that is fairly recent in our space. Obviously, risk-based approaches in clinical trials has been around for a while with risk-based monitoring and things like that. But in the TMF space, it is fairly new. So, any comments from the panel on what we're seeing on screen?
I think we'll get into this more, Paul, but of course, implementing a risk-based approach means lots of things to lots of people. So it'd be interesting to hear from the audience what they have implemented.
That's true. That's very, very true. There are many ways to do this. Okay, let's go on to the next poll question. So this question is about how you apply that risk-based approach. So if you're implementing, or if you've implemented, where do you leverage a risk-based approach? Is it for just the initial QC, so the Alcoa type QC? Is it for periodic review, or do you leverage it also just for overall TMF oversight? This is interesting. I was expecting a lot more people to use it for initial QC.
Me as well, because
that's good.
That's the most easy thing to do. That's for the initial QC. So I'm result.
Very interesting. So the vast majority are using it for periodic review, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's definitely very, very useful for periodic review, but only 11 votes so far for initial QC. And then 26 votes for oversight, so 29%. And again, to Kathy's point, periodic review and oversight can be different things to different people. So it's but yeah, definitely the fact that only 13% are using it for initial QC is very interesting.
One thing that
sorry,
I was going to say one thing about the oversight kind of option is, of folks talking about oversight of TMF Health or oversight of their vendors and CROs,
right?
Or both, so it could mean a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So let's move on to the final question. So if you've implemented a risk-based approach, or you're in the process of implementing it, is your risk-based approach part of an integrated risk management plan? So it's neck and neck so far. And what's interesting is just over half have said no, that it's not. Nick, do you think it should be? I'm picking on you, Nick. I'm picking on you.
I think this is the interesting kind of bigger question when you talk about the broader picture of risk-based quality management and expectations of the regulators at a kind of program level down, right? And how you design to manage risk, and that perhaps, and it's maybe getting into later conversation, but how we should then become part of that. So it's not just something that might exist in your SOP, but it's actually could be driven at the program and trial level by that overarching plan.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that looking at program risk or overall study risk in relation to study design and things like that is super important. It's an important part of this. TMF risk-based approach should not live in isolation from everything else. I think that's important. Okay, well let's get started with the panel, and I've prepared a series of questions. So we'll go through, and hopefully we get to ask all the questions and get your insights. But the first question I want to ask each of the panelists is: do you currently use a risk-based approach for the TMF management in your organization, or for those of you that are not at a sponsor organization, have you worked with organizations that have implemented such an approach? Who would like to go first?
I can. So
Great.
Obviously my answer is yes. Otherwise, so, yes. And I will refer maybe to the poll. For sure, we are using a risk-based approach for the initial QC. That was the first thing and the most easy part, I would say, to introduce. We are coming from a strategy where almost all the documents were independent QC, and now we are moving more towards assessing the risk and the criticality of the documents, of the record types, and then only deciding if they should go through this independent QC, yes or not. Like that, already you can really target and focus on what matters. Obviously, we also took the step for the periodic review. At GSK, we call that the TMF completeness check, which is based. So we wanted to shift the mindset from making a sampling of the QC. Let's say you do 20% of review of your document that are in there. No, we really wanted to shift the mindset and have the functional areas putting their expertise into value to really check against the processes that are applying or the events that occurred on the study. So they have to assess the risk based on this, and then check only the documentations pertaining to the scope that they will define through their risk-based analysis. And then we are touching already a bit of the oversight. We define this as the routine activity of checking the matrix. There as well, we have introduced some risk-based mindset, but I cannot say it's already fully effective there. There is still a lot of mindset to be changing. I think we will come back on that in the challenges. But there as well, on the other side, we would like to introduce some risk-based focus also on the business or the area of your TMF where you think you have more risk, depending on your study type, the configuration of your study, etc. So,
so that's really interesting. So you've actually got quite a comprehensive risk-based approach. You're really trying to apply it at all levels. Just one sort of very quick question before I move on to the other panelists. For the initial QC, you said that you've basically classified the document types or the artifacts by risk, and we often talk about the German paper. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, right? So that was that paper that came out about 4 or 5 years ago that was written by a group of German pharma people. Did you apply something similar to that, where you just went through artifact by artifact and said, okay, well, this artifact?
Or initial selections of the classifications or the record types to be done by the QC, it was really done based on decisions from the business. But it's true that we recently reviewed all our reference model to identify those classifications that were the most at risk based on the criteria used in that ACT paper. And so we have not applied all those changes yet, but that's the idea. It's to reapply all those principles to determine, what will be in the QC.
And I'd love to talk about this forever with you and Noel, but I'm definitely going to move on to the other panelists. But I've got a few ideas that are coming to me now, based on what you've been saying. Nick, how about you at Moderna? How are you approaching this?
So I don't know if we're quite as far down the journey as Anne-Noël is. We do use a risk-based approach in several areas. So we do have it for QC review at upload. We have it for periodic review. I think where we have to go next is, it's, for example, I saw in the chat actually, one of the people listening in said that if accuracy first time is 90% above, we don't do that QC. So we've done that analysis. That's how we configured our system, but we haven't got that kind of clearly documented, that risk analysis and to show. And we also don't have a sort of procedure about, well, when will we revisit that? So I think that's a next step of maturity. In our periodic reviews, we recommend configuring the review at the trial level based on site risks, and there are suggestions there, but again, it's not a very well specified kind of a transparent criteria or rational criteria that we can show. And so that kind of gets us to that next step. And I think the sort of fully mature model would be where we are back at that stage in trial design, thinking more bigger picture. Is this a new CRO? Maybe we're using a CRO in a specific country that's new to us. Do we need to do more oversight there and things like that? So I think that kind of looking more broadly at oversight, that's also another next step for us.
Right. Interesting. So just to clarify, Nick, so you're taking a risk-based approach, but it's not formally documented, the methodology. Is that why
it is inside? I mean, we do document some of that in our TMF plans, but
okay.
I mean, more sort of particularly for the QC review, sort of making that something that we'll revisit on a regular basis, and being able to show that outside of the trial level, because that's sort of like this enterprise decision that we're making right across the portfolio. So we do document it, and we refer to it, but I think ideally you want to be able to show your logic, show your commitment, what you've committed to, and show the results of that. And that's the other piece we're putting in place now.
Okay, great. Interesting. Kathy, I'm sure that you've come across this before in all of your dealings with the various different pharma companies that you've worked with, right?
I'm sorry, Paul, was that for me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. Yes. In fact, as you say, I have never worked for a sponsor. I have worked for a vendor. And the systems that I designed have been incorporating risk-based elements for quite a long time in consultation with many different industry experts. So we had aspects of controlling the plan documents for studies based on the risk and nature of the study. Initially, a lot of the energy went into the QC process. As you said, we implemented the German paper, as you say. And one thing to keep in mind about the German paper, though, the way that they look at TMF documents is based on the risk to the trial subject and the integrity of the data, which is a little bit different than the risk of getting it wrong in the TMF. And so therefore, we always encouraged our clients to monitor the metrics around the process to say, well, okay, this may not be a high risk document, but we seem to be messing it up 50% of the time. We probably need to do more QC on it, or go back and re-educate the people doing it to get a better result. So we kind of suggested that they take the risk-based approach that had been implemented and roll in these other factors of how are we doing, and also sometimes to consider things like the experience of the person that was doing QC. So some people might be allowed to bypass it if they were highly experienced and had a good track record in uploading documents. So we kind of took all those aspects into account. And then as far as the periodic review, implemented a lot of risk-based approaches in that, based on many different factors in the trial and the documents and what the focus of the review really was. And found that a lot of times, though, people wanted to implement those, but they were nervous about actually doing it. So sometimes they didn't always take advantage of what the software could do, because their appetite for risk was really not very high. So it seems very similar to what went on in risk-based monitoring. So the health authorities said for many years, you can go ahead and do this, but a lot of sponsors still did, 100% source data verification for many years because they were concerned that a few mistakes would really sour the health authorities' opinion of their data.
So Donatella, I know that we were sort of talking about approaches earlier. I'm sure you've probably got some insight there as well.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, I can bring an older experience when I was working at sponsor side. We tried to implement a risk-based approach in TMF, but we failed, definitely. I mean, at that time, we were not able to implement an effective risk-based approach. And I think that the biggest, let's say, issue was the approach that was not correct. So there was no defined strategy and some defined criteria to define what really matters in terms of artifacts in the TMF. So we just, sit down on a round table, say, okay, the opinion is this document high risk or low risk, with no predefined and agreed standards and criteria to do this core and evaluation. And so at the end, there were lots of discussion, but no, let's say, an effective outcome that bring us to develop a TMF risk-based approach. And I think that is something really important, to understand the plan, the strategies, to define a methodology, and then to start this exercise, maybe even with a pilot project or maybe a small part of the TMF to verify if this approach makes sense. And definitely then, to validate, as you said before, even in our meetings, that approach, is working. Otherwise, you really just waste your time with lots of discussion because apparently everything matters in the TMF. If you start to think about, yes, maybe also a newsletter can contain an information that can have an impact on the patient. Okay, so we don't come out of this discussion anymore. So I think it's important to define criteria and methodology before starting any exercise. Yeah,
and I think it needs to be pragmatic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For it to be useful, it has to be pragmatic, and I think that's the challenge because it can get very complex. Like there's so many factors that can impact risk. And so coming up with something that was pragmatic and manageable is super important, but not that simple. And as we've heard, there are different ways of doing it, and I think you need to, panels like this are very useful because number one, we can hear what people are actually doing. But also, I think some of the other initiatives that we're seeing, notably within CDIS, to start to think about providing frameworks and tools and things like that that people can use is actually very useful as well. All right, I'm going to move on, but I'm also going to check in to see if we've got any questions from the audience. I'm not sure how to do this. Okay, well, we'll come back to audience questions soon. Let's press on. So, one thing that I think is interesting is, what should we base our risk-based approach on? Should it be about the TMF process itself? So the risk of not filing things correctly, the risk of not performing Alcoa checks properly, those kinds of things, or should it also be about operational risk and the risks to the study itself? So it's a much broader thing. What do you guys think? What should the basis be? Should it only be TMF process, or should it be TMF process and the operational risks of the study? That makes sense.
Okay, maybe I can jump in to start.
Sure.
And then leave the floor to the rest. So I think, Paul, that we discussed yesterday with Oliver during the last episode of the podcast about agile methodology. And one principle of the agile methodology in TMF management is to have the TMF management process embedded into the clinical trial one. And I think that this is something that is very often missing in companies. And this is the very big gap. So very often you think about the TMF just at the end of the trial without thinking about the TMF during the setup and the planning of the trial. The life cycle of the TMF starts since the beginning, not just at the end. And so, even the risk assessment should be done since the beginning. And in an ideal world, I would say, with the clinical stuff, not a separated one. The problem is that very often what I see is that the TMF is not considering the risk assessment that clinical operation, usually do to verify, the risk of scarce enrollment or source data verification. So it's not included there. So this should be part of this risk assessment to have this very holistic risk approach.
And we should all, yeah.
No, I was saying that I totally agree because, and that's really where we have focused, for instance, and when you were saying, should it be focusing on TMF process of I would say the clinical operations risk, I would say that I think we forgot even to consider maybe the TMF process in our approach. We have really focused on what is happening in the process of the people that are really filing in the TMF, those two contributors. What is the risk for them? What are the risks within their process? What is the risk related to the execution of the trial? I don't know if there is a new CRO involved, a new labs. I mean, these are new risks that are popping up in the study. And so where we should focus the attention on ensuring that the TMF is also ready for those new events. So I must say that we consider mainly these as our the basis of our risk. Yeah.
Right. No, I think it's kind of it's natural to look at what's happening in the study and to craft a risk-based approach around that. But I think the actual TMF process itself is also something that we need to look at. It's a combination of things. Well, any thoughts, Nick, on your end?
I think I'd agree. I think when you think about what your oversight is, which or what your responsibility is for oversight, and so given the example of you have naive trial sites, using the tool of the TMF process to give the clinical teams, trial teams, more insight into the quality of what's coming in earlier. Early on, there's a perfect example of adapting the TMF process to the operational risks that have been identified. They could be monitoring more often, right? So why wouldn't we do the same on the TMF side and say, well, this site we've worked with 50 times, they're very experienced investigators, versus this site that are brand new to working in a sponsored clinical trial. So yeah, you're right. I think it's combining both, or it's the TMF process at the service of the bigger operational risk management.
Great. All right, I have a question from the audience. So the question is, does Nick or Anne-Noel have any experience with working with a CRO that has implemented a TMF risk-based approach? And are there any other expectations a sponsor would expect for a CRO to apply? So I imagine you're both working with CROs. Who would like to go first?
Anne-Noel?
I must admit that I'm not personally in contact with the CROs who are working for GSK in the terms of the TMF. But that's true that we are starting to look at really what are their processes as well, because this is something that we would like them. We are not obviously controlling their process. We just need to ensure that it's meeting the regulations or our expectations of quality, and so that where we can influence them. But I have no experience that I can share with how it went and what were their approach or what were our expectations, really. Yeah.
Similarly, I think the sort of minimum bar is we're looking to see that the process can be defended. But I also think that the CRO's activities are quality oversight of their own activities and their own processes. So I need to understand it and understand that it's sufficient and that it's being done, because it is part of that kind of quality ecosystem. But that's their process, and we're performing oversight of their work, as well as others, but within Moderna. But I do think there's a kind of a bigger question, which we've sort of wrestled with a little bit, which is, when you look at some of the models for doing periodic reviews and oversight and inspection readiness reviews, you could get yourself into a model where actually you say to the CRO, we want you to follow our process. And I wrestle with that only, and I say this, and there could be folks that I work with from our CROs on this listening in today, but it is difficult. If I worked in a CRO, it's difficult to work to 50 different processes and procedures. And so I think one of those open questions for me is, are we better validating the CRO's process and making sure it's happening, or kind of saying, no, here is the process we expect you to follow end to end? And I don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Because as a sponsor, we always try and get the CRO to follow our process, right? But it definitely is it's a big problem for CROs, a headache. I mean, I used to work in the CRO, and I definitely understand that. But at the same time, you kind of want consistency as well, right? And especially if you're in a situation where the CRO is managing part of the TMF and then the sponsor is also managing part of it, then how do you ensure consistency in your approach? So it's a tough one. I have a question from the audience, another question from the audience. What tools, I'm sort of rephrasing it a little bit, what tools of risk control do you implement? So how are you actually doing your risk-based approach? Is it with your eTMF? Is it manually? Is it with Excel? Or what kind of tools are you guys using?
Currently, it's manual in an Excel file. We would love that our TMF system will support, at least for the periodic review. It's really highly manual and in an Excel file. So we are looking at solutions now to how the systems could trigger those events or identify those classifications we would like to look at. Also, when the interoperability of the systems will be there, how can we really look at directly in the other system? That's all. This is not in place already. Yeah.
Right. No, exactly. That must be quite challenging. You must do like lots of exports to Excel of big data sets, and then have a whole bunch of algorithms that you run on that. Yeah. And Nick, what tools are you guys using on Moderna?
So a mixture of in-system tools, Excel sheets, and then we use both internal reporting, but we have kind of dashboards. And I love having the chat on this platform on the right side, because Helen Price pointed out something that I was going right to, which is we actually just last month started a project to bring all of our periodic reviews inside the system. And because particularly we work, and I'm sure everyone knows, in seasonal infectious disease, and they can be very large scale trials that scale up very quickly, which means we're filing tens of thousands of documents in a short period. Excel files don't work. And most importantly, to Helen's point, you can't pull metrics out very easily at a portfolio level. You can't kind of look at trends with your CRO partners to see where you need to do work in particular areas of quality, etc. So to my mind, is as much as possible is automate that workflow, so that you can get good reporting out, and that's where we're going.
Right. Great. This is really good discussion. I'm gonna move on to the next question. So obviously, the regulators want us to follow a risk-based approach to TMF management. They've been quite vocal about it. At the conference in Berlin, for those of you that attended, there was a German regulator there that spoke about risk-based approach in his opening talk, and it was quite interesting what he was saying. But yeah, definitely there are expectations. So have you guys undergone any inspections where the inspector has actually looked at your risk-based approach and provided feedback, or not yet?
Not yet. It's in
Not
the
yet?
air, which is next month, or it's a couple of months.
Okay, all right.
Now, and crossing fingers that the feedback will be as good as the one that I received in Berlin, who was, if you do that, you could not be wrong. So I took it as a kind of validation of the ideas that we had. Yeah, but we'll see.
Yeah. No, I think I mean one thing that the inspector from BFARM said was that basically his expectation was that you're implementing a risk-based approach to improve the quality of the information in the TMF, not to try and reduce your headcount. I don't know if you remember him saying that, Anouar.
Yeah,
and
I remember.
And I kind of agree with him, because I think a lot of people think about risk-based approach as, it means that we can do less QC. But I think it's more about refocusing your resources who can leverage that risk-based approach to actually really improve the quality of the information and inspection readiness.
So as long as we can demonstrate that our TMF will be in a good quality, and that all the actions that we did that we took to do it, I mean, inspector will not be able to say anything about the strategy if our TMF is of a good quality. And you're right. I think it's refocusing where we are adding value, where those functional, because we are asking also the functional area to do this risk-based analysis and then the periodic review. So we want to really leverage from their value, their added value. They know their business, and so if they can just focus on what is important for them, where it's risky, it's not maybe reducing time, because maybe more people are involved than just a few that will do, I would say 100% check. But so it's maybe more people involved, but with better quality.
Yeah. It's really it'll be interesting to see over time if we're able to sort of see a reduction in the number of observations around TMF, because you get these sort of the annual reports that come out from the EMA, and I think number one is always TMF in terms of observations. It'll be interesting to see if that trend goes down a little bit as we start to implement this new approach. I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that organizations face when they're trying to go in this direction. So what do you guys think are the main challenges to implementing a risk-based approach to TMF management? I'm gonna maybe pick on Donatella a little bit to give us some insights into what she sees as the main challenges.
So definitely there are lots of challenges. I would say, I think that we can, make a panel just on the challenges of risk-based approach. But just, based on our experience with companies, I think that first of all is knowledge and understanding of risk. So very often, unfortunately, TMF is not considered a risk because it's not considered the core element of an inspection, and so you don't care about potential bad consequences of an inspection. And so, let's say, this lack of knowledge and understanding, I think, is a very challenge because if you don't understand that your TMF process, your TMF can be a risk, can put you at risk, definitely you will not be ready to implement a risk-based approach. Secondly, yes, there is no standard. So obviously, this is an effort that every company needs to start. It's a big exercise, probably bigger at the beginning, and then it will be, not easy, but much, you can better manage it after all. But yes, it's a big effort, and so sometimes you don't have the times, the resources, and the competencies internal to your company to start to develop this kind of strategy and process. So yes, I would say that these are, let's say, the main challenges, and definitely I think that the last one that I can mention is all the variables that we have listed also in our white paper. There are really lots of variables when it comes to TMF risk that you need to take into consideration. And so sometimes it's really a matter of let's do a decision. Okay, I want to focus on this variable, on this criteria, because probably I think that they really have a big impact, and maybe, you know, with BI under variable. But that means to have a vision, a strategy of your risk-based approach, and to know exactly what are these variables, what they have, what impact they have. So it's a big exercise of assessment and evaluation that needs to be done. And sometimes this exercise, you know, again, you don't have time and resources enough to spend, and so it is quite challenging to implement a risk-based approach.
Yeah, right. Kathy, any additional thoughts in terms of challenges that you've seen or that you see?
I think that identifying what actually introduces risk into your TMF is an interesting problem to solve. So when you're looking to control risk, what actually causes risk in the first place? And that one of the things that's going to become a challenge very soon is the introduction of AI, I think, because it sounds great, but it's very unclear now how you'll validate the conclusions that an AI comes to on where the risk might exist in your study. You know, if it pumps out an answer that says, these are your 3 high-risk areas, do you just assume that it's right and go in that direction? Or do you feel like you need to validate how it actually came to that conclusion? So I think that that's a huge promise, but it's also may, in the short term, at least, introduce more risk by itself.
Yeah, exactly. I think AI definitely is double-edged sword, right? It's difficult. I mean, it has a lot of promise, has a lot of power, but it's also very difficult to demonstrate, you know, the validity and consistency. All right, we have another question from Helen. Any thoughts on risk-based QM approach for use of AI in TMF processes? So we're on the subject of AI. Any other thoughts on using AI for risk-based quality management?
I would say that I think whatever tool you might use, you need to validate its usefulness, right? That is I think you're alluding to, Paul, the challenge with a lot of the AI tools and machine learning tools is actually making sure they're doing what you think they are. And we've seen a couple of really great presentations in groups that are using various tools like bots. And I think the best one is treating them like they're a virtual employee, and you sort of have to monitor their contribution and train them and retrain and so on, and make sure they're still useful to the process. So I don't see them as fundamentally very different. I actually, my own hobby horse, as Paul, you know, is that there's a lot more to be gained by digitizing the TMF and moving to much more structured data, which could potentially eliminate some of the many more fundamental challenges that are behind everything that we deal with on the TMF end, which is really all those processes before the records reach the TMF, and that how we get these massive international trials with hundreds of different stakeholders to bring records together is kind of, you know, the big problem to solve. So AI for me is that it's just something you will use tactically and carefully, but it's not. I don't know that it's. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is where we'll go, and we'll start querying, talking to our TMFs using large language models. But I think there are probably easier ways to crack that nut than actually using those in the long run, or better ways in the long run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So obviously, data. You know, we're moving towards data. You know, AI needs data to be effective. But it's going to need data that's not necessarily just in the TMF. It will need data from elsewhere as well, which is where, you know, the whole interoperability thing is very important, and digital data flow. But as we're talking, I'm sort of thinking around the concept of standardization. And do you think that it would make sense, or is it possible for us to develop a standard risk-based framework that can be used, at least as a starting point, across sponsors? So could CDIS develop something that would allow us to have a standardized approach to risk-based approach? or is it too specific to each organization or each study? What do you guys think?
I think it's a question of identifying what an organization should be thinking about, Paul, not telling them the answer. So in developing your risk-based framework, you should take into account the following and ask the following questions in your organization, rather than dictating what the answers to those questions should be.
Right. But so I know that there's obviously there's an initiative underway within CDISC to provide kind of some guidance around how to start taking a risk-based approach, but it's very much focused on the TMF process. But I do think that, you know, if you think about keep coming back to the German paper and the fact that they've actually classified artifacts by risk level based on patient safety and data integrity. Is that something that we should try and formalize, do you think, or is it too kind of cookie cutter and will be difficult to apply?
I think that any good practice sharing is welcome, because obviously we have done our own process. Nick has done his own process in Moderna. Kathy has good ideas of what she did in the past, Donatella as well. So total harmonizations or standardizations, it's maybe different than the reference model, but at least putting together the practice or providing guidance. Okay, independent QC, maybe indeed, ideally it should look like that using the ECK paper, yes or not. Periodic review, if there is a consensus that everyone is doing similarly. Obviously, there will always be adaptations from one business to another, from a CRO or a small company to a big pharma. That will anyway be different. The risk will be different. So a total standardization, not, but really putting together all the good practice and learnings that we had in our different companies. I think that should be welcome to refine, to be able that we are all refining our process and make it at the best, because that's what we all like, is that our process is the best.
So Russell in the chat makes a good point. The sticking point, as I see it, is that every organization will have a different assessment of and appetite for risk. So it's quite difficult, in fact, to sort of standardize it. But guidance, I think, is definitely welcome. If we can start to sort of align a little bit in terms of how we do this, I think it's definitely welcome. Nick, you wanted to?
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, because I think you need to distinguish. Every time I've seen anything new in the industry, in my time, we always end up with some kind of checklist, right, that everybody shares.
Right.
But you got to think about it like, and I've seen risk management, it started with Transcelerate and the risk assessment tool, right, the RACT that they developed, which is really failure modes effects analysis. So really they gave everyone a tool to do the assessment. The results are going to be different every time. And that allows the organization to identify the risks that are specific to it. But it gives everybody a good kind of methodology to use. And I think the methodology can be standardized. What can't be standardized is this particular document type is high risk for Moderna and GSK and PPD and so on. You know, I think that's the piece we need to focus on, that methodology and training.
Right. Yeah. No, that's definitely well said. All right, so we're getting close to the end, and we're actually in overtime. But I see that we've been given a few extra minutes. What are the opportunities? So how can we leverage this more? You know, what can we do, which is maybe, you know, in addition to what we're doing already today, to improve quality and really sort of get value from this? Who wants to go first?
Let's throw in a sort of an enterprise level thought, which is if you're a person who has access to the people in your organization who are developing risk management across development, clinical development broader, is engaging with those people and saying, shouldn't we be part of that conversation, right? I think maybe Donatella, you said it right at the beginning. Maybe Noelle is like, we're just not thought of as part of that. But more and more, I think the TMF is becoming one of those key pieces of submission. Like, you know, you need a clinical database, you need a pharmacovigilance database, and you need your TMF. And I think that's kind of where I'm kind of going with that is go back up the chain to where this is all being built out and say we need to be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts? Any other opportunities that we see? Other than reducing the number of observations, hopefully.
Obviously, that's our hope. But
yeah,
really, for us, what we took it as an opportunity to really break the silo as well within the organizations, because when we are evaluating the risk, it's, as we say, across operational, the clinical operations. So I think there is really opportunity to enhance the collaborations between the study team members, the clinical documentation team, and to break the silo as well, and as well to break the silos between the different TMF systems, so to bring more visibility on the global TMF.
Great. Any, as we wrap up, any final thoughts from anyone? Anything else anyone wanted to say? No,
I think, Paul, I saw a very nice comment, a message that, you know, in risk, we talk a lot about risk assessments, risk evaluation, but a very important element of risk is also the risk reporting and communication. So also to develop a very effective communication of the risk to make people really understand and the relevant stakeholder understand what are the risks and the implication is crucial. So not just, you know, limit the exercise to identify the risk, but also once you have identified, share, communicate those risks, make people aware about those risks, because otherwise, you know, any effort will not make sense. So it's very important also the communication, the right communication for the risk identified. Yes.
Great.
Someone else also raised the issue of quality by design, which I think this is an enormous part of risk management. Is a lot of the tools that are discussed are really quality by inspection. Quality by design is a superior methodology to quality by inspection that achieves better results, probably with fewer resources. So a lot of times it's really going back to defining quality in the first place and trying to build it in from the beginning, preventing mistakes from being made or omissions from being made much further upstream.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Quality by inspection. That's a good one. Obviously with ICH E6R3, I mean, quality by design is definitely going to be taking center stage with risk-based approach, right? So I think the two, they kind of need to go hand in hand. Absolutely. Great. Well, listen, thank you very, very, very much for a really engaging panel. That was excellent. I think there was some really good insights there. A lot of good ideas as well. I think for the audience, I'm sure that everyone now is sort of thinking a lot about risk-based approach and how they can sort of embark or continue on this journey. So thank you for being excellent panelists. Thank you to Oliver for organizing. And we will be heading into the lounge for the few minutes that remain. So if anyone wants to join us and continue to chat, you're very welcome.